So welcome to our EASA webinar about safety promotion and our summer campaign. As I said, my name's John Franklin. I'm head of the safety promotion team at EASA, and I'm joined by Claudio Martirano from the TC Alliance, who are a company that support us with our safety promotion work here at EASA, whether that's making videos, building the magazine, and all of those different things. It helps also that Claudio is a safety manager for in the safety team at Air Baltic. And at the point where he came to work for us at EASA, he'd also then been responsible for the state safety program in the Latvian authority. And as many people in aviation, he was an exceptionally busy person, trying to, do lots of things in Air Baltic, support the operation, do all the things that people in safety teams do, supporting the operational staff. And then whether it's people from EASA or other authorities or regulators or the wider system, we bombard people with PDF documents and information of varying sizes. And then poor people like Virus then have to make sense of whatever has been thrown at them. And actually, on Virus's second day at EASA, it was not long after the Air France 447 accident, and the world was talking about, the aviation world was talking about, how do we help prevent loss of control? And there were all these people from different big, mostly organizations, talking about how great it would be if we could provide lots of information to help manage the risk of loss of control, as it was at that point. And somebody had provided a 923-page document. And as Virus pointed out, is whether you're a safety manager in an airline or running the state safety program in a small country like Latvia, what chance would you have to make sense of a 963-page document and make sense of it? Now, ironically, he hadn't predicted that things like AI and ChatGPT would make jobs like that much easier. But the problem, of course, is everybody uses AI completely differently. So even in an AI world, solving the Latvian problem is not so easy. And that's what we see a lot of our role here in safety promotion at EASA. Now, of course, many of you are doing various versions of safety management in your own organizations. Within the ICAO framework in Annex 19, there are 4 pillars of safety management. And it's really interesting when I think about how much time we spend as organizations in 3 of those pillars, in safety policies, in risk management, in safety assurance, and those kinds of things. When it comes to who safety is actually for, in terms of the reality of protecting families traveling on holiday, or all of the passengers and all of the people in the aviation system, The reality is that we spend far less time and resources in how we communicate that as part of safety promotion than we do in the other pillars of safety management. And that's where a lot of the work we've been doing within the EASA safety management, safety promotion team has been trying to really understand what does that pillar of safety management look like? How can we do it in a collaborative way that saves as many organizations as much time as possible? Now, I want to give you a window. Now, this is probably a window into your own world, but the average life of a safety manager in terms of the number of pages that you have to read. So we added this up. The average when it comes to reading occurrence reports and documents and the EASA ops rules and all of these other things you have to deal with as a safety manager. Now, imagine this. It's the first working day in January, maybe it's the 3rd or 4th of January, and somebody comes to your office as a safety manager and they give you all of the Harry Potter books, 4,101 pages. And then they add in The Lord of the Rings, The Chronicles of Narnia, Game of Thrones, and The Hunger Games. Now imagine all of those books sat on your desk, and then somebody says, I've given you all those pages, but now in 6 months' time, I'm going to come and audit you on a random part of one of those books and expect you to know what was going on. Now, ironically, all of those books are pretty interesting. The EASA ops rules, I would venture, perhaps, are not quite so interesting. And the average safety manager finds themselves in that position where, and like I say, we added the average number of pages up from the average number of occurrence reports and all of these different things, and you have to make sense of it. You have 28 books of material. Is that really feasible? Claudio, you work as a safety manager in some of your day. How much information do you have to deal with, and how much of a challenge is that for you?
Yeah, it's like you said, it's the problem of all safety management, and it was a huge problem with me recently because I recently took over the role back in February of this year, and it was just hit with everything, especially when you're doing a backlog of occurrences as well, and you're doing the backlog of information, and you've got a new part of the sector to learn as well. I'm from a maintenance background, so going into the simulators was like a whole new element that I have to go through all part aura and everything else. And like you said, it was just material upon material upon material. So it's too much sometimes. And this is where we, as in the industry, as safety managers, we need support on how to deal with it.
And of course, just when you think you've got it, you get an audit in the middle of it as well, which always
Yep.
makes life even more interesting. So
As well
we
as
have
doing your
this.
internal audits yourself. Remember
Well,
as well,
that's the
because you
thing.
have to
Yeah, it
audit
hits on
yourself
both
as you
ways,
go
doesn't
along.
it? And so when we first started doing safety promotion, we thought, well, that's great. We can come along with some safety promotion and we can simplify things and make lots of videos. And wouldn't that be nice? But of course, now think back to those many, many books. The videos of those books, again, much more interesting. The EASA Air Ops rules and a few occurrence reports amount to 99 videos. So the Harry Potter films are 20 hours. Game Lord of the Rings, 18 hours. Chronicles of Narnia 7, Game of Thrones, obviously much bigger, 70 hours, Hunger Games. By the time you add in, that's 99 videos, 125 hours, or 5 days of your life as a safety manager lost to just understanding the sheer volume of information. So this is really what we try and do from our safety promotion side, is we're really there to see how can we help you as safety managers make sense of a complex world and then build whatever safety promotion material you can for your operational teams in order to help them make sense of all of the things they have to do and operate safely and engage with your operational staff on safety. So that's where we come into, well, what actually are we doing? What is safety promotion and how do we do that? So here's a little map we created of safety promotion in 4 basic steps. So dare I say, when we first started our safety promotion journey back in 2019, certainly the EASA solution to most problems from a safety promotion perspective was to write a guide that was a PDF that somebody could view on a screen or print out and read. And that was it. But the more we've got into this, and particularly with many of the different organizations that we work with on safety promotion now, it's really about understanding the audience. How do we reach them? what problem are we trying to solve for them? So it's almost, imagine like a film. I always use Star Wars as a classic example. Is you imagine Luke Skywalker at the start of Star Wars, this young, naive young boy with perhaps some potential, through to the Jedi that he was at the end of Star Wars. Another great example is Erin Brockovich from that film, where there's a character journey that they go on. And who's the audience that you have in your different operational teams, and what do they know now, and where do you want them to be at the end, and how do you help them do that? And is a PDF document the best way to get them there? And ultimately, what we really focused on then is, in order to get them from here to here, what do we need them to know? How do we want them to feel? And what do we want them to do? And I think this is exactly the kind of thing when I talk about the work that we're going to do as part of the summer campaign this week, particularly the work we've been working on with TAP and EasyJet, Aer Lingus, Luxair, and many of the other organizations that have been involved in building the campaign and the work we're doing. It's ultimately about engaging people on the ground. So as I say, we're going to be on the ground with EasyJet and TAP and the others at Lisbon, and there's going to be staff on the ramp, and pilots and cabin crew and engineers, and bringing people together to talk openly about their challenges together. And this is where a lot of the theme of this year's summer campaign is around that together, is understanding each other's challenges and talking about it more, and encouraging that conversation. So we think about the audience and what do we need, and then what content do we need to create in order to do that kind of thing. And this is where, for us, a lot of what we build with the Conversation Aviation magazine, we pick different topics. The topics are as I say, they're built with a number of different airlines and airports, and they're the same topics. We see many organizations talking about the same things. So we create articles, the collective in the magazine, different documents and guidelines, and then we start making more videos on things, having more webinars like this, making articles with then social media posts and images, and hopefully what we start to be able to do is we build material, and our AirOps community site is then geared up with an A to Z, and you'll see at the end of the presentation, which we'll also send out on email straight after this, is there's 2 QR codes, one for the AirOps community, one for the Conversation Aviation magazine. And in the community is an A to Z that has all the different topics, that provides lots of this different pieces of material. Now, we're still learning particularly about videos and images and posters and that kind of thing, but it's really simple. We start to realize to be able to change material. So we did, as a trial, there was an airline that had done some posters, and we ran those through ChatGPT, and we said, can you debrand these posters and make them available for anybody? So we start to be able to take different people's posters and make them available. There's more and more resources that we're building. And then how do we reach out to people? Do we use social media? In your companies, you're less likely to do that, but it's, what tools do you have? Can you use training to give, at the end of training, to give people specific messages that support your safety management system, all these different things. And then the final part of the process is the review of success. What worked, what didn't work, what can we do to improve? So that's kind of our basic safety promotion process. Sorry, I'll just jump back to that. Now, one of the things we started to realize is, historically, we talk about, we talked about topics. So one day we're talking about preventing ground damage. We might be talking about unstable approaches. We might be talking about how to implement the EASA fuel rules and manage fuel effectively. When we just talk about the topics by themselves, we realize it's just stuff. So we try and use this safety map that we created in order to tell that story. So we might talk about a particular topic, but then saying, well, what does it mean for your mindset as an organization and as individuals? What does it mean for your people in terms of how many people do you have, what skills and abilities they have, these different things? What does it mean about resources? What does it mean? Where does it link to in the rules? What risks are linked to this topic? And then what occurrences there are to learn from. And in our Conversation Aviation magazine, we use a fake airline SafeWings that enables us to take occurrences and situations that different organizations have given us, and kind of de-identify them and use them in examples. So when you see our material, we're using this safety map as a summary at the end to help tell that story. I don't know, Claudio, you've been involved in a lot of this work, and now you managed to get back in. What do you
Yes, now
think?
I'm back.
Yeah,
I
yeah, no, don't
apologize.
worry. No,
It was actually I really wanted to ask a question as well before the last one, and you kind of answered it here. But I'd like to actually have a little bit more of your feedback and your example, because one of the challenges as a safety manager is when it comes to the content, we've got to be careful that it's not just dissemination of information. We've got to make sure that people understand it as well and learn something from it. So you're the kind of one that started a lot of the time with, the storytelling element of it. And like you said, within the magazine that we do a safety promotion, we've got a fake airline. So everything's done from an actual organizational perspective, from an operator's perspective. What advice would you give to safety managers for how to start the storytelling process and actually make sure that people understand it and not just dissemination of information?
so I think the biggest thing I've learned more and more is quite often you can sit in as a safety manager, or I certainly here making our safety promotion material. We quite often, it's easy to sit in an office and try and figure that out for yourself, if that makes sense. And I realize that actually the biggest value comes with the conversation, when we talk about how we do it, how we do this with actual people. Certainly, we talk to a lot of the airlines, particularly in airports that we work with, ground handling companies, and I think the experience seems to be is the more you can get out there with operational staff and understand what their challenges are. And actually it's interesting because I kind of take some of the questions as we go through, and I see we've got one of the questions says we're talking about fatigue and challenges brought by climate challenges with hot temperatures. How can this manage in a business model where bulk loading is prevailing even with high volumes? ULD aircraft dropping bulk configurations, high volume being a hazard in itself. And actually, that's one of the biggest. It's a great example of something where, so we did something similar to this last year, less public, but we were on the ramp at Manchester Airport. Ironically, the place I first worked in aviation for 2000, a long time ago. But it was interesting to sit with we went to the crew room of the handling company that EasyJet were using at the time. And we were there with, there's table football and a pool table, and the EasyJet leadership team arrived with a bunch of sandwiches and, to have just a conversation. And I think people learned so much from that conversation about those kinds of challenges that they talk about in that question. It's how much water, that EasyJet leadership were thinking, how much water do we need to provide? When you see how many people there were in that crew room and how many people are working all the different turnarounds of those aircraft, how much water do you need to help make sure you can provide to help those people keep hydrated in hot weather? It was interesting to see the provision of sunscreen as literally at the door, so anybody could literally just, encouraging people to make sure they were using sunscreen. All of these different things, trying to, you're just understanding the challenges people had. And we actually had a session there in the crew room on the pool table with which part of the process is more complicated, and how could it be improved. And I think it's that kind of operational conversation, that getting down and having those conversations, I think, which is hopefully quite interesting. And actually, I'll maybe, while we're here, come back to the next question. It says we're talking about apron safety, spaces, time frame, schedules, turnaround time, everything getting tight while traffic's growing exponentially with lots of aircraft in a short time. And actually, that's one of the big discussions we're going to be having on the ramp tomorrow at Lisbon. Is about, it's about clarity of responsibilities. Does everybody know what their job is? Has everybody been given the maximum support they can to do the job they have at that particular turnaround as well as possible? Again, understanding, I think the more management can get out, particularly whether it's on the ramp or in cockpits and in galleys and in hangars, to really talk to people about the challenges they have every day. I think if there's one thing we need to do more of in aviation, I think it's those kinds of conversations.
Whilst you mentioned that, Johnny, you made a very good point that I want to highlight as well, is that you need that accountability as well. So actually getting accountable management into the
Mm.
conversation and making them aware of what you're doing, how you're doing it, is vitally important. Because, like you said, if you don't have the resources, you're not going to be able to get much done. So that's a really good point you made. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think actually moving on to the next bit is we talked about safety promotion, all the different parts of it, but ultimately it's the question is then how do you do good safety promotion? What does that look like? And one of the things we really focus on, and we do a lot of this at a strategic level, is thinking of it. We have how do we ensure that a safe aircraft performs safe operation in a safe system, and how do we link then whatever activity we're doing to that outcome, rather than it's so easy to get buried into the detail of a particular rule or a particular process. Is kind of taking that opportunity to step back and then being able to do that with accountable managers and the workforce, safety teams, etc. I think really helps. So I think that's a key part of it. And then particularly, like I say, just following up then from our side, we're keen to try and make sure, we can provide material for people to use. We would love continual feedback, so you can email us at safetypromotion, all one word, at easa.europa.eu, or drop me a message on LinkedIn as well. And anything you see in our material is completely free to use. You don't have to ask our permission. If you want to rewrite an article for your own context, please do that. If you see pictures or images, we have them copyright free to be used for non-commercial purposes, so you can use that. If you see a poster, you want us to help you make something, please again reach out to us. And ultimately it's about how do we make people feel part of our efforts working with us at EASA, and then similarly, how do you do that in your organizations? And I say particularly we focus a lot of our discussions now on how do we identify the different opportunities to communicate to staff. Where are they, and where are those moments, and how can we make each moment of interaction count? How can we understand the audiences, the people that do safety that we're trying to communicate with? And then how can we give them clear and specific information that they can use as part of their teams in order to make a difference? So that's kind of what we're trying to do in terms of safety promotion. So now if we maybe move on to the summer campaign and what we've been building. So it's effectively, there's two parts to it. The first part is this safety week, just to kind of continue raise awareness, and we split across the week into different themes and topics, and we didn't want to make it specific to today we're going to be talking about prevention of ground damage, and today we're going to be talking about unstable approaches, today we're going to be talking about something else. We wanted to make it more general so everybody could be involved, and then it had more of a set of themes across the week that involve as many people as possible. And we've got now quite a lot of airlines and airports who are using this to have their own discussions either this week or indeed other weeks across the summer. So this is a blueprint that you don't have, we're doing it this week, but you don't necessarily have to do it this week. If you see this and it inspires you to do something in August or September, then that's great. And we'll also be having probably a follow-up winter safety week at some point, probably in October as well. So this is how we focus it. So today this is how we do safety. So who are we as an organization? Asking people to think about how do we do safety at our airport, airline, whatever it is. Then on Tuesday, we're focusing on what we call UR safety. So it's about people, it's about human performance, it's about human factors, decisions, and working together as a team. On Wednesday, it's called Every Task Matters, and it's more then focusing on, well, what are the specific processes and procedures? Maybe there's a specific procedure or a process that's new in your organization, getting people thinking about that. Thursday, we're focusing then on just culture, reporting, all of those kinds of things. How do we report? How do we talk about hazards? How do we continually seek to improve? And then on Friday, it's very much about celebrating our safety champions, encouraging people in organizations all across the world to promote and make people feel valued who do the little things to help improve safety every day. So that's the general campaign. And then basically, what can you probably sat there thinking, well, what can we do in our organization? What does that look like? So the question is, how do you move from posters and emails to something real? And it's these are the key things. You know, as I say, we're going to be doing more of this ourselves, and we all continually learn what works and what doesn't. So, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just ultimately about getting out there. So, as I said, getting out, getting people talking, move from just doing the work to talking about operational safety challenges. Interactive briefs are great, you know, swapping the clipboard for surgeries and peer talks, and, you know, really making communication about safety two-way. Engaging activities, you know, if you can do something practical, you know, we're going to say we're going to be out on the ramp at Lisbon Airport tomorrow, looking at, you know, a turnaround, you know, in that question, what kind of challenges do you have? And then really just getting people involved, driving participation, getting out, making people feel valued, you know, being out where people are, whether it's cabin crew, pilots, you know, in the hangar, out on the ramp, etc., etc. So that's those things. So we've got a couple of questions there. I think they're both very similar. Do you inform about Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and there's only information about today and Friday. So in terms of public webinars, we're only doing something today, and then on Friday we're going to be continually promoting things on. I'm going to be promoting things on our LinkedIn. We've got things on the community site, but it's kind of not us transmitting for the next 3 days. We're going to be, you'll see us posting things on LinkedIn, but you know, ultimately it's kind of from here, it's over to you, getting your staff doing things over the next 3 days, you know, thinking perhaps how you can use the material and those kinds of things. So it's not, I say, a continual week of activities.
Yeah,
I sense a question there.
can we just emphasize on that as well, that, you know, this is obviously, yes, I set this up, you've set this up, John, you're and your team, to make sure, you know, get people involved, but we also want to hear back from everybody else on what their best practices are, what they're doing, how they're actually doing it in their geographical environment or their work environment, so that actually the more information we get, the more we can actually learn and pass on to others as well. So it's a bit of a learning curve this week as well, but we're looking forward to it.
And dare I say, this is the first kind of, we've done the transmit type safety weeks for the last 3-4 years, and now we really want to, you know, start making it more practical, and dare I say, we dip our toe in the water of doing that. And you know, I would love perhaps next year where we, can you imagine something where we go from place to place, and imagine you do Monday in Lisbon and Tuesday in Madrid and Wednesday in Bratislava, and you know, we see how we make it work, but to get out on the ground and do different things. But yeah, it's, as I say, it's about trying to get as many people connecting their campaigns as possible, and hopefully over time more and more organizations pencil this first week of June into their calendars to have their own safety weeks together. So that's the general theory of that. So we've got in this presentation, and I say, as soon as we finish, I will send this presentation to everybody who's registered. So today, as I say, these are the main things we're focusing on. This is how we do safety, and I say this is what lots of other organizations are doing. So how are we planning ahead? Are we ready for the summer? You know, it's already started, but the school holidays start soon, and you know, are we ready? Is everybody aligned locally what our priorities and our challenges are in our different bases and locations? And then how do we stay ready throughout the summer? And this is where you'll see we're going to keep talking about different topics as the summer goes on. In terms of UR safety, as I say, how do we help people look out for each other, care and support for each other, be confident speaking up? How do we help people to make good decisions? And then how do we help people be, you know, understand that we are as an industry stronger together when we work together? And then in terms of the tasks, how do we help people do it right? You know, following standards and procedures, knowing what to do if a procedure, you know, you have to sometimes work around something, but how do you do that responsibly? How do you help people stay focused? There are key parts of specific tasks where, you know, you maybe don't want to distract people, and do we all know when that moment is, and those kinds of things. You know, again, coming back to working together in teams, taking pride, quality of work. How do we really do that? And then, as I say, on the Thursday, you know, it's all about reporting culture, learning, you know, appreciating if we see something that's not safe, it's making it normal to say something. And quite often, I think that's the big challenge that many organizations see. I don't know, maybe Claudio, what do you think about that? Certainly we get a lot of feedback that that's one of the hardest things that organizations face.
Absolutely the hardest thing. Again, coming from a maintenance background and working in those type of environments, people are almost scared to speak up. And a lot of the time, the reason for that is because they don't know what's going to happen with the occurrence reporting. They don't know what the end result is going to be. And, they've had negative reactions in the past. Part of safety promotion as well is also promoting what's going to happen in the future, that it is an open culture, that people can speak up and that they won't actually get into trouble for it, and that actually it's a learning culture whereby if people don't speak up, we can't do anything about it. And so it's about that promotion of, if you speak up, we can fix it and we can stop it happening in the future. And so, yeah, it is definitely a challenge. I'm still figuring out in my own work how to actually fix that challenge, being perfectly honest. I think it's going to be ongoing for a long time, but it's definitely something we need to promote more of, is speak up so we can improve upon it.
Definitely. And it's interesting. So we've got another question. I'm highlighting them as we go. Hopefully you see this in the webinar itself, in the Slido part, but it's somebody says, not a question, but a heads up, that the campaign since safety promotion is commonly falling back after the work on other SMS activities, mostly because there is so much compliance monitoring focus. They say we do bi-weekly operational safety walks and every time have a long list of work. And I guess that's, in some ways, that's also linked to the speak up. Is there's, if you're a busy safety manager or involved in compliance, you end up with so much to do that actually, do you really want people to encourage people to continue tell you more when you can't prioritize? And actually that's, or can't, not prioritize, but it's hard to then know what to focus your efforts on. And I think that's going to be one of our efforts, I think, over the next 12 months from an EASA perspective, with our own conversations about safety promotion and safety in general, is how do we help people prioritize? If everything is important because it's a compliance piece and we have to fix it, what headspace do you have to really focus on the most important things? And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges. I don't know, what do you think, Claudio?
It's a big challenge, but also, we are getting to a point, especially you mentioned AI before, John. We're getting to a point now where life is becoming easier. In that question, part of the problem is the fact that everything has to be written up. Of course, everything has to be written up, but sometimes the paperwork itself is just too much depending on what you actually need. But now, depending on the system you're using, the understanding of what you're writing and why you're writing it and using AI, it does become a lot easier, the documentation side of the job. And that's important to just, we've got to do everything in stages. And unfortunately, a lot of times people are almost flung into these positions of safety and compliance without really like handovers, without understanding systems, using legacy systems that maybe aren't beneficial. And I think part of it as well is that safety managers need to take a bit of ownership to their job and be like, actually, if you've got a team who are involved in safety and compliance, you can then dictate to accountable management and to the other ones what systems should be used in order to make your life easier, because the easier you make your life, the better you can actually promote safe environments and get all your staff involved. So it's always a work in action, but this is where these conversations and asking these questions can actually be really beneficial, because then best practices come out of it.
And I think that's one of the things. I mean, we've been trying to find the right, I use the word secret sauce for safety promotion, but some of you may or may not know, about 2, 3, maybe 4 years ago, Claudio and I and another guy, Chris Drew, did a podcast sort of video cast series where we were talking to safety managers. And at some point, I think we'd like to start more of that up, where just to kind of almost like a safety manager self-help group, when a lot of people, I think, I never forget, there was a safety manager we had on one of those podcasts 3-4 years ago, who said, they always thought it was just them in this position until they were at a conference talking to somebody else from another company over coffee, and found that actually, they were all in that together. And the more ultimately we can support all the safety teams in doing their job and understanding what kind of approaches work to prioritizing compliance versus top risks and all of these things, I think hopefully we can help support that. So that's that 4th day. I'll come back. I'll see that we've got another question there. I'll come back to that in a second. And then, like I say, the 5th day is all then about recognizing success and local heroes. And I've seen lots of different really small things that have made a huge difference for staff. from a just from an engagement perspective. There's one company I know that they did a quiz and a draw where they have quite a lot of simulators, and they had the opportunity where ground staff who'd been taken part in some of the safety promotion work had the chance to have 2 hours in a simulator with an instructor, kind of learning to see what life was like as a pilot, and all sorts of different things like that, where people swapping roles, seeing other things from other people's perspectives, small giveaways as well. I know they go down really well. You don't have to spend a huge amount of money to find something interesting and engaging that can make people feel part of something, and then just making people feel recognized. People who've done a great job. Sometimes the challenge is there are so many people. How do you do that? And again, I know in some companies they're recognizing people at a particular base receiving a safety award, and that means something in the company, and there's all sorts of different things. Again, we'll start hopefully packaging different ideas like that up, so you can say, we've learned about what worked in a particular company, so we then hopefully can share that with other people. So
sorry, just to add on to that as well, John. Sorry, just to jump in. I know as well that some people think that they don't take it seriously, and that that these small giveaways maybe aren't enough. Some people might think that, but then you have the opposite end of the spectrum, where some people actually are really good ambassadors for safety. Like, we've actually noticed that with some of the work that we've done for EASA, that there are a lot of people who want to actually have that badge of approval and come forward, and they've been really useful and been used as ambassadors for other parts of the company. So even though you might initially not get all the buy-in that you need, just stick at it as well, because it will grow naturally. And this is one of the biggest problems as well, is that sometimes as a safety manager you try something and then it doesn't work, and then you think, oh, it's failed. It's not necessarily failed, it's a work in progress. So just always, go back to that point and showcase what's actually happened and what's worked in your environment. Again, so the best practices, so we can support each other and pass on the knowledge to other people. Thanks, John.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, thanks for that. And so I'm going to go back actually before we move on. We've got an interesting question, which I have to say is it's probably 25 years I've been thinking about this problem and talking about it an awful lot. So the question is, while EASA emphasizes a no blame, just learning approach to encourage reporting, how do you recommend organizations maintain the balance of a treacherous culture when a maintenance error is caused by gross negligence or a willful violation without losing the trust of the workforce? Now, it's interesting. Ironically, we just prepared one of our colleagues was speaking at a conference, helicopter safety conference somewhere else in the world, talking about a technical topic, and I was helping this colleague prepare to also do something on just culture. And it's interesting, particularly that nuance between no blame and just culture, and particularly one of the key points is that ultimately just culture isn't about no blame, but quite often I'll be interested in your thoughts on this in a second, Claudio, when I explain it, and to see what you think, and whether I've explained it well enough. And it's interesting that this concept of gross negligence and willful violation, now I'd say in my experience, for the most part, the vast majority of what might be perceived as gross negligence or willful violations has mostly been, whilst the incident that has happened, and dare I say, bear in mind that I was a technician, I left school at 17 to become as an aircraft technician in the Air Force, and then I was effectively a maintenance manager in the Air Force for a number of years. And I remember back to some of those early days where, particularly I remember working on Nimrods, where we were doing lots of workarounds a lot of the time that might not have been perfect. And it was a case of, were you the person who'd been doing the workaround when it all went wrong? And as it was perceived perhaps by management at that time, that was a gross negligence or a willful violation. But I guess the ultimate question is then having a clear, I think the answer is then having a clear process that really looks at the situation, because in many cases, I don't think, certainly in my experience, I've seen one or two cases. I think the worst one I ever saw was somebody who deliberately gone round after a large, after the servicing had been carried out, and snipped lots of pieces of locking wire, just because they wanted to be bad. Now that is for sure gross negligence or willful violations. But quite often in my experience, an awful lot of gross negligence and willful violations are people working around things, shortages of spares, shortages of time, perceived pressures, and those kinds of things. And this is where I quite often err towards the no blame, particularly in the early stages. And I think in any organization is if you're seen understanding more than just the human error. It's the human in the system, what position was this person in who's done this willful violation? And I think, I think that's the greatest, that's then the answer to this question, is that if you've done enough as an organization to show, yes, this really was somebody who was just being a person who was trying to go home early. The difference we used, certainly when the first Just Culture framework I ever was involved in building, was the difference between willful violations for organizational gain or willful violations for personal gain. If I'm doing it because I want to go home early, I want to get some benefit as an individual, then potentially that's where you're into the culpability side of any Just Culture process. But for the most part, people doing bad things are doing it because it's the only way they can see to get the organization out of whatever situation it's in. I don't know, Claudio, did I explain that well enough, and does that make sense? And I've been working in a maintenance environment for a long time. What do you think?
Yeah, so I understand where you're coming from, and I'll maybe answer the question as well from my perspective and to emphasize what you said. And I'm going to do this in a way that I hope doesn't get me into trouble, because from the question, what I understood was, how can you actually make sure it's okay, but without, losing this trust in people? In my experience, and having come from very similar maintenance environments to John, you've got to be very transparent. And this is where, again, I might get into trouble for it, and I apologize, but obviously from an IASA hat on, everything's got to be done by the book all the time. Unfortunately, different hat on now. Mm-hmm. We understand that it's not always the case, and John did explain that there's willful negligence, which is supporting the organisation, supporting things happening, making sure it's safe. That's generally never done in isolation. That's generally done as a group with understanding of OCC, MCC, everybody involved with spares. Can you get it out because you've got a lack of spares? We'll change it as soon as we've got a chance, come next flight. There's layers and layers of safety, and these things do happen. The only way to actually promote it and not lose the trust is just to be very transparent. Get all the staff in, get this managers in, and be like, look, we know that this is going to be a situation. We know that it's going to be right. It is not correct, but we have solutions for it. And think of it from that perspective, that when you're having a safety inspection or a compliance inspection, you don't have to be 100% perfect, but you have to explain that you understand the risks and you have to know how you're going to correct it in the future. If you're that transparent and have that planning ahead and have that understanding, you're not going to lose trust from the people. Quite the opposite, you're going to gain the trust that your company is going to have your back and support you, with the understanding that you're trying to be perfect. And these kind of things unfortunately happen, but you have solutions for it. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of finish that bit, that answer there, I think the big part I always found one of the most interesting parts of any Just Culture kind of approach was around this concept of the substitution test. And would an equally trained, equally knowledgeable individual in the same situation be likely to do the same thing? And if the answer to that is remotely yes, then the chances are actually, it's more of an organizational challenge that shouldn't then involve any form of blame. And I've seen some amazing examples where reporting systems and trust has exploded in a positive way because dare I say, the best case I ever was told about was somebody who caused a lot of damage to quite a lot of damage to an engine, who was a union shop steward that everybody in the company knew. The management were just looking for an excuse to fire. The company followed the process, identified an organizational challenge that was then resolved, and the resolving of the organizational challenge, rather than the blaming individual, literally exploded the value of their SMS, and they never look back. So hopefully that helps. It's an interesting one. Maybe we move on. Actually, we'll go to the next question and then I'll move on and talk about the sum of it. So sometimes ground handling are challenged by airlines as they're considering by default training is not consistent when you follow 1110. That's a very specific number. I like that. And methods. When you answer human in the process are the failing ring for most. No is not enough. You as an organization failed. Is this just culture? And actually, that's another interesting area of just culture I'm exceptionally passionate about, and we need to do a lot more work on, is the concept of just culture as it applies between contracting organizations. So actually, I've seen that on a number of cases where you have, let's say an airline has a process that then the ground handling company or a maintenance organization then has to follow, and if something goes wrong, then the automatic perception is that does that learning and just culture exist between the airline, let's say, and the companies it's contracting as well. And I think, again, the more we talk about that openly as a challenge, and the more we can promote what that looks like, I think, actually it's quite hard to understand, particularly when they're involving contracts that are quite legal and need to be black and white and very specific. How do you allow for a lot of grey in there in between? I think that's a bit of a challenge as well.
In that one particularly that you talked about, the ground handling and using that one, yeah, especially in ground handling, we do some work there where you've got a ground handler having to do what EasyJet say, what Ryanair say, what somebody else says, all in the same environment, and that can be very challenging when there's that lack of understanding and the lack of transparency and lack of the people on the ground understanding that they can go forward to management and say, well, this is not feasible because. And then it's up to the organization to go back to their operators and service providers and come up with solutions. And this isn't like, when it comes to just culture, it's about that level of understanding beyond just the job role and how it impacts the entire business. And that's where you've got to have that back and forward as well with, all the operational staff, making sure that they're aware of when you can come back.
And of course, we're talking about lots of ideal situations, and we appreciate the world's a lot more complicated than that. So I can talk about I can talk about the ideal world like this, but I obviously appreciate it's not as easy as that. And one of the things we've seen, particularly when we're out on the ground with organisations, is I know one of the biggest challenges then is it's all very well, safety people and also then senior leaders saying X and Y, but ultimately it's the operational staff and the operational managers who are then squeezed to deliver on-time performance and all the operational outcomes. And I think that's the real challenge. I've been on the ground in so many situations that I see where the operational staff and the operational managers expected X or Y to happen, and ironically the senior leaders were then shocked to find that was the way their policies and their theories and their ideas have been implemented, but nobody had ever really had that conversation because everybody was scared. And I've seen that also between organizations and their contracted providers as well. So yeah, it's a really interesting one, and I'm sure we'll debate that a lot more over the summer and beyond. So let's move on, because I've just got a couple of last bits I want to talk about just in terms of the wider summer campaign. So, I say, feel free to pick up any of the summer safety week stuff that we've done, the different days. We've got lots of posters. We can share those with you if you drop us an email, as I say, to safetypromotion@easa.europa.eu. I'll put that on the end of the presentation so you don't have to remember that. And similarly, if you drop us a line, we can share different materials with you to use. But then going forward across the summer, we're going to be creating, we're just finishing now the next Conversation Aviation magazine with a whole batch of articles, and our three kind of major themes running through the summer are going to be watching for fatigue, particularly following the basics, and speaking up early. And they're going to be three of our kind of key themes we're going to continue talking about. As I say, we're preparing the next Conversation Aviation magazine, and we're going to be talking about topics including summer weather challenges, GNSS interference and operational resilience, wildlife hazard management, fuel planning and fuel quality awareness. You maybe saw EASA published an SIB on Jet A, Jet A1. We're going to be talking about that some more, and also we've got some videos coming to help promotion of the EASA fuel rules. Actually, on GNSS, we just filmed a video last week around new phraseology for jamming and spoofing. We're going to be talking about maintenance reporting and damage awareness, so particularly where there's a report that might be needed that requires maintenance action, whether that's a lightning strike or wildlife strike or overstress or anything like that. We're going to have a specific article focusing on that. Talking about workforce and people challenges, getting people thinking ahead in terms of how we recruit staff and are we promoting careers in the industry well enough. We're going to talk about safety culture and safety campaign good practices. And then the other one, I left it deliberately for the end, is then with passenger safety and cabin, particularly passenger communication. So we talk particularly a lot about unruly passengers. We talk about lithium batteries. You know, there are lots of topics for passengers, and we communicate in lots of different ways to people who potentially only fly once or twice a year. So we're building this concept of basically 9 behaviors that would define what it means to put yourself in flight mode. And then the idea is we're evolving and finalizing the text for these, and then the idea would be for the future and for a campaign later this summer, particularly around unruly passengers, but that as much of the industry as possible are using the same kind of materials and the same definitions for what does it mean to put yourself in flight mode. So as you see on this side here, 1 is about being ready and being prepared. 2, 3 and 4 are then about unruly passenger type behavior. 5, 6 and 7 are about lithium batteries. 1 is about preventing turbulence injuries, and then the last one is all about leaving bags behind and evacuation, which I know is a really big topic at the moment. Been some recent, well, every time there's an accident or an evacuation, there seems to be videos of people with bags, so trying to tackle that as well. So they're the different things we're going to be talking about over the summer. We'll have the magazine and all the different activities, and then we encourage you to use any of the material, have more and more conversations, get more involved. I'm just looking back to the questions here. So do we have anything for production organizations? Unfortunately, not a huge amount, but it's something that we're looking at, what requirements people have to then take this into the production environment. Ironically, it's something I did many years ago with organizations like Lockheed Martin and BAE Systems and Northrop Grumman. So yeah, as we learn more about safety promotion in the operational environment, we'll certainly be looking at how we can tailor that and provide more for production organizations. And maybe actually one of the things we were thinking is to break that out and maybe have like a production design and production safety week that specifically focused and talked about those kinds of challenges. So yeah, that could be interesting. So what I've also got, and I'll add our email address in here at the end. There's the 2 QR codes that will take you either to the left one to the community itself, or the other one to specifically where the Conversation Aviation magazines are. We'll keep it open for another minute or two, a couple of minutes to see if there's any questions. Maybe Claudio, are there any last thoughts from you before we head off to Lisbon to carry on the next bit?
Yeah. Although I've already said it, I just want to emphasize, that you, John, and your team have been doing a fantastic job, obviously, doing these promotions, but we do need other people to just give us what they're doing and best practices so we can talk with the entire community. I mean, what you and the team that we're going to be meeting in Lisbon are is a small group getting together to discuss what are the best practices, how we can actually benefit from each other, how can we give benefits to others. The more people who are involved in that Conversation Aviation, the better. And so I'm just encouraging everybody else on the webinar, all the attendees, get involved with Conversation Aviation. All the details are there from John and his team. The more you get involved, the better it will be for all of us. So please do get involved. Thank you.
Fantastic, thanks. And the more posts, if you're doing any safety activities this week or over the summer, we'd love you to tag Go Safe Together. Let's get the conversations going. Look out for our posts this week. Drop us comments. Tell us what you think. Tell us what you're doing. We'd really love your engagement. And as I say, continue reaching out to us on LinkedIn. We'd love you to just keep us updated. What do you need? We're really here to support you as an industry with material that helps you every day. Fantastic. Well, thanks for being on, Claudio. Safe last bit of your drive to the airport, and we'll see each other in Lisbon.
Thank you.
Next evening.
I'll see you later on tonight, and thank you everybody for being part of it. Really appreciate it.
Fantastic. Thanks everybody, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you at our webinar on wildlife hazard management on Friday. If you go to the EASA event pages, you can still register for that. So fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm just going to do a last check in the chat. I will stop sharing my screen and just quickly check in the chat if there's anything else. Any other questions? Oh, okay, sorry, we got a couple of questions here. Given the safety critical requirements of airport operations, how can continued reliance on seasonal temporary staff be justified without compromising operational safety? I think it's a difficult one, isn't it? Organizations, when the level of workload varies, it's hard. You have to be able to cope with that somehow, and then how do you weave that into your organization? I think that's a topic all of its own. It's one of the challenges of the industry is we have seasonal peaks and troughs, and dealing with that is quite difficult.
Well, this is actually a good one to actually consider, because again, we don't claim to have all the answers right away. But it's something like that is repetitive and is going to come up again. That's maybe something we can work on, not only us, but as a group, and get other people involved to try and find solutions to it. So although we don't have an answer now,
I'll add that to the list of topics we talk about for articles for the future is, coping with seasonal, the risks of temporary staff, and what good practices are there. I think you can't make the problem go away because it's just a factor of the industry, but we can certainly see what promotion we can do to help manage that effectively. Okay, fantastic. I'll just going to write that down. Managing seasonal staff.
Very good example, though.
Okay, the next one we've got. While we share some of your material magazine, can we adapt it to our own company references report? Yes. So if you so the magazine we have it, so if you have something, many organizations have something called Adobe InDesign, and when we make the magazine, we make it's made in InDesign, and the InDesign files are available if you email us. And you can then literally rip it up. You can copy and paste anything you see. Feel free to do whatever you want with anything you find on the AirOps community or in the magazine. It is exactly there for you to use and abuse. We create it exactly in that purpose. So please do. And if you need any help with that, do drop us an email and we can help too. So there's that one. And then I saw Rome Ciampino are having a safety walk on the runway this week. That's great. Awesome. Going to give safety training this week, and for sure we'll take this safety week promotion at the class. That's great. So there's specific things. That's great. What a great way to finish. Fantastic. Thanks for being part of this discussion. It's great to we have more than 100 people on the call at the peak, so that was great. And if there's anything you need from us, be in touch. Claudio, thanks very much. See you later. Take care, everybody.
Thank you all.